are back. Sorry for those technical difficulties, viewers. Thank you so much for staying with us. As I said, we go into our first segment with Dr. Paul Richards, who will be discussing violence against men. Good morning to you, Dr. Richards.
Thank you for having me. Happy International Men's Day to you and your colleagues and your audience.
Thank you so much. Happy International Men's Day to you as well. All right. So what do you say is the main contributor to domestic violence in men? Normally you would hear domestic violence against women. What do you think might be the main contributor for it in men?
In terms of men being the victims of domestic violence,
Yes.
well, I mean, dysfunctional relationships, poor socialization. So, if people grow up in an environment where they see physical violence and abuse is the way to resolve conflict. That's the way they learn to resolve conflict. And very often it starts in childhood and goes into adolescence and ends up into adulthood. So if a relationship doesn't have communication or has unhealthy approaches to dealing with conflict, because all relationships will have conflict at one stage or another, then what happens is it very often turns to abuse. Verbal abuse, which people understate and don't understand, can lead to physical violence. So if you don't have mechanisms to deal with conflict, to deal with disagreements, then unfortunately it escalates into abuse and or violence. And because it's underreported, because men have these social norms that they adhere to, it doesn't mean it's not happening, and it's not as devastating for the man or the family as a whole.
Okay. In your opinion, what is the first step in curbing this issue? Because you said it starts at a young age and they go through certain issues in life and they may grow into it being abusive. Yes. So what is your opinion on being the first step in curbing the issue of domestic violence in households and to men specifically?
Well, generally, we should look at domestic violence in an holistic manner. I think one, teaching more effective communication skills to young people, starting very young, so that men understand what being a man is, as opposed to sometimes the toxic ways men express their masculinity. One, teaching young people in general conflict resolution, and as adults, even when you're an adult and you get into a relationship, understanding, getting to know someone as opposed to diving headlong into a full-fledged relationship may be one of the ways to get to know someone before you actually get deeply involved with them. And when you're involved with them, defining parameters within which the relationship must operate, understanding how to identify triggers that may have you in an unstable position in the relationship, understanding the power dynamic in the relationship, and also defining ways to communicate through conflict or through disagreements. So as children, we need to socialize our children differently, raise them differently, so they understand how to communicate and how to deal with effective conflict resolution. And as adults, teaching adults the skills to communicate in a more effective manner and a more productive manner.
Okay, what are some of the ways you would see that we need to correct in households when it comes to dealing with young male children? What are some of the correction that you would put towards the corrections that we give in the household? We come from a Caribbean culture where, beating and the shouting and stuff is a norm. They say when you don't grow up with it, you don't turn out well. So what are some of the corrections that you would put toward issues like these?
Well, first, modeling the behavior that you think is appropriate. So you can tell a child, don't shout at your sister, or don't shove your sister, or don't hit your sister. But if you're doing it with the child's mother, that's the example the child is learning from. So you have to model the appropriate behavior, model effective communication, model communication in general, model how to sit and discuss issues even when you disagree, and reinforce it with words. So you can't do one without the other. Very often, parents are telling children, don't shout, don't hit, don't shove, don't curse, but they themselves are
Hitting and
doing the
shoving and
behaviors
cursing.
and,
Yeah.
and setting an example for their children. So what do you think the children are going to do? And also, there are teachable moments on television and media, because children are learning from media and social media, where they're seeing all sorts of content coming at them, and it's socializing them. So you have to sit to them and say, listen, what you're watching there, let's discuss it. Do you think that's appropriate? And if you think it's appropriate, why? If not, why not? And discuss the content and the information coming at them, because that's also socializing them and teaching them how they may choose to behave in wider society or in different circumstances. Because all of these societal impacts, these agents of socialization, are having significant impacts on training our children and socializing our children for behavior in a particular way.
All right. I remember you mentioned that as adults, sometimes we don't look at the signs or we don't look at the triggers while we're dating. And then we end up into the situation itself later on. So could you mention some of those signs and triggers that we may look for so that we may avoid that situation?
Well, somebody who is not open, you first meet somebody and you may be a little infatuated with them. So you tend to ignore red flags and triggers. For women, men who want to tell you how to dress, what to wear, where to go, people who generally communicating with you 16, 20 times a day, they're messaging you. It may seem, oh my God, he or she really cares about me, they're into me. But it's a little, you have to know there's a balance to strike, particularly when you just meet someone. Ask them about their past relationships. If they're open to discussing those things, how did the relationship end? How did you deal with conflict in those relationships? Asking about their family life, what kind of family they came from, and if they were affected. And if the person is open to discussion, it's a way forward. If they're very closed and don't want to talk about these things, how are you going to communicate in the future? Men or women who are very abusive verbally, who tend to insult you, who tend to put you down, who are not supportive of your dreams and aspirations, who don't want to talk about your dreams and aspirations with you. All of these things are red flags and signs that maybe I should take another look at whether or not I want to get involved with this person, or if they've had a violent past, or if they have issues managing money. Very often people don't want to talk about money, but money is one of the biggest contributors to conflicts in relationships, and how you deal with money, how you deal with debt, how are you handling money responsibly. All of these things will eventually have significant impacts on your relationships moving forward. So all these things you need to have open discussions about. And if you see they're not managing these issues in their lives responsibly, it may be a red flag to maybe pull the brakes a little bit and reevaluate your assessment of this relationship or the potential for it.
I want to zone in on men in specific. Now, you gave a lot of pointers on what women should look for, but a lot of times men go into relationships and because of what society expects from them, they just take and they don't say anything about it, or at least that is what I've heard, right? So what are some of the signs that men could look at in women where they would now consider it to be that it shouldn't be a relationship on a whole, that they shouldn't lead anything into anything further?
Well, the signs and triggers are basically the same, The difference is that men generally have a physical advantage in a relationship. So the issues don't come out as readily because society, or older women have equalized in society in terms of education, social status. There's still a significant power dynamic in many relationships. And it also stems from what men want out of a relationship with a woman or a partner, and how they carry themselves in a relationship. People have different personality types. And as I said, if someone is not willing to communicate or be open about various aspects of their lives, if someone is, to me, this personal thing, seeming to depend on you to carry them through at very early stages of the relationship, you have to ask yourselves, well, what am I getting into this relationship for? And what is the person getting into the relationship for? But very often the triggers of potential abuse and victimization are the same for both genders. It's just that the power dynamic generally in society is different from men and women. And men very often fall into the habit of living up to societal expectations. So how they behave is very often guided by those societal expectations. And they generally sometimes make decisions based on what society expects of them, as opposed to sitting around rationally deciding and having some introspection and asking themselves, what do I want in my life? Who do I want to be, and what type of partner do I want? And what type of partner am I willing to be in the relationships? Because very often with both genders. We want a lot from the other person, but we're not looking at ourselves to see what we have to offer in a relationship, or a mutually beneficial relationship, or a relationship that's productive and healthy.
All right. Those are some great pointers because recently I was speaking to someone and that person would have mentioned that they don't understand how it is somebody would end up in a situation like that. How could they have not seen the signs while dating that person leading into a relationship? So I find those pointers to be great ones for both genders, you said, yes?
Very often we jump into relationships because we see someone, we're physically attracted to them, we're infatuated, and we want to get from one stage to the other very quickly. In many cases, sexual activity starts very, very early before really getting to know someone, and those endorphins and hormones kick in. And you really have not gotten to know the person at all before going from stage to stage in a relationship. So by the time you end up saying, well, we are in a relationship, you really don't know who you're in a relationship with. And that's where the problems start, and how to deal with this person, or who this person is, or how this person responds under certain circumstances and societal pressures, or life's pressures, because life will have pressures, and it's an individual that you're dealing with, and that person has a particular response pattern to societal pressures and societal demands. So you really need to get to know someone very well, with both men and women, before you dive deeply into a relationship.
All right. So I am getting that, a type of conversation like this needs to happen again because I'm seeing that there is an abyss of things to talk about in terms of relationships and young people and what to look for, what not to encourage and these things like that. Yeah. So, okay. So we're past the relationship stage of it. We're in that relationship and a man has understood or he's now seeing from his standpoint where his abuse could be happening toward him and he comes to you, what should be the first step as a friend dealing with a situation like this?
Um, Communication. Are you communicating with your partner? If I'm talking to a friend who comes to me and says, I'm in a relationship and I'm being verbally abused, I'm being cursed out, um, the person is hitting me, the first thing I'd say is, are you feeling safe? Because you're being abused. Is the person open to communication? Is the person open to going to counseling? And if not, you may want to separate yourself from that, because whether you realize it or not, whether you admit it to yourself or not, whether you internalize it productively or not, you are in an unhealthy situation. And very often people want to stay in relationship because they're in love, and you can't discount how people feel, the emotional component of it. But you have to ask yourself, is this healthy for me physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially? And if not, you may need to consider removing yourself from the relationship, having a timeout. If the person is open to communication and or counseling, you may seek counseling to get to a healthier position. But I would advise anyone who's being abused physically, psychologically, or emotionally, or even financially, to first remove themselves from that situation, because these things can escalate very quickly, in some cases leading to fatalities, violent, fatal conflicts. And you don't want that at all.
Okay. And, oftentimes people would say, I don't want to get involved in their marriage and these things like that. Would you say that you would do it, given that, the circumstances of how somebody could turn against you? What do I do when I don't want to get that involved, when I don't want to be that intrusive into someone's marriage, but I still want to help that person deal with the situation?
Someone has to want help. You
Okay.
can't force your opinion on someone who doesn't want your opinion, or who doesn't want to abide by your advice. If they come for your advice, you give them your advice. If you think the person is in danger, in physical danger of being hurt, I think you should report it to the police. Let the police deal with it from that perspective. Police has the victim and support wellness unit, and they can run an investigation to see if the person is safe. But you don't want to feel the person is in an unsafe position, maybe the victim of abuse and violence, and not to me. Either talk to them about it to help them to get out of that situation, and or if you feel violence is happening or imminent, report it to police, because you don't want to wait and say nothing and then somebody ends up dead, which has happened in many cases in Trinidad and Tobago, where we hear, where the neighbor used to hear this, or I used to he and she used to tell me X and Y, and I didn't want to get involved because it's husband and wife business. When you have a fair idea that this may be happening, and you can report it to police in a responsible, confidential manner, so police can go and investigate and make sure everyone is safe in that situation.
All right. I love how you have mentioned the holistic system that we have to use in terms of reporting. In your opinion, do you think that the system itself treats well with cases of domestic violence against men? What is your opinion on how they treat with it in terms of report to dealing with the issue itself?
I think it's gotten better. I think it has a long way to go. Sometimes I don't understand how and why a confidential report ends up in the public domain. Men who report that they are being abused very often and end up the victim of secondary traumatization, where because of societal expectations, well, he can't handle himself. He lets she do him this and that and the other. So society responds in a particular way to a man, further trying to emasculate him. And I don't think that many of the reports have a right to end up in the public domain. So I think the police have come a long way, and they are, by my understanding, from Senior Soup Claire Guy Allen, who is the head of this victim and support wellness unit of the police service, that they're receiving training as to how to deal with this situation. But I still think we have a ways to go where the police response to many of these situations are concerned or is
Okay.
concerned.
All right. And I know you have to stay with us because we have another big issue to discuss, and that is bullying amongst men or bullying toward men. So we stay tuned for that, viewers. Before we go into that segment, however, I have one last question to you. To a man that is already in that situation, what advice do you want to give to him on air?
Don't let your pride get in the way of your well-being. Very often, men are socialized to be proud creatures and ego-driven creatures. Don't let your pride or your false pride get in the way of your well-being, your psychological, physical, or financial well-being. If you feel you're in a situation where you're uncomfortable, or you're being taken advantage of, or you're being abused, either have a conversation with someone who can help you get out of it, or get out of it yourself, because it's not productive being in that state or in that situation for a period of time, for any time at all. And very often men stay in these situations because of a pride drive. So I would say seek counseling for both parties. Try to engage in open communication and dialogue, productive dialogue. And if those things fail, remove yourself from that unhealthy situation.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. I find that to be very good advice. Sometimes pride, maybe your ego may get into the way, and it causes us to remain in a situation that could be very much different and get better for ourselves. So I hope that the young men who are viewing this and who may be unfortunately in that situation, they take heed to counsel. All right. So Dr. Richards, I ask you to stay tuned, and to our viewers as well, I ask you to stay tuned. And in the meantime, you share the live, share the live, share the live. We'll be right back.